Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Beyond Horizons. We are looking at Deepstar. This is my submarine project. Despite our transfer window to Jool being quite far away still, I want to get ready because obviously Lathe is a very interesting place to visit in the Julian system. And to make it a little bit more enticing, the atmospheric package at the front of the submarine there can collect some samples from deep under the ocean. There's 2 experiments to be done at below sea level. The only issue there is that with the Kerbalism mod, all samples have to either be returned home or to a science lab, so we'll have to get a bit creative with how we get the sample somewhere we can analyze it. Now, there's 2 ways we could go about this. We could send a completely autonomous mission, and I'm not quite sure how, but somehow like collect the sample with a autonomous SSTO that can then take it back up to orbit and back to Kerbin. I could take people out to the Julian system. My only hesitation is that Jool is quite a big radiation trap and has a very strong magnetosphere filled with a lot of ionizing radiation, so my Kerbals will probably get very sick. If we get enough science in the meantime, we can overcome this problem. There is a part offered by the Kerbalism mod, which essentially is a big magnet to act as a shield against radiation by diverting it away from the ship, so perhaps we could try and get that before our transfer window, because I really like the idea of building some kind of floating scientific outpost on the oceans of Lathe. If we do go down that route, I will have plenty of testing to do in the meantime. And with that beautiful eclipse, we return back to HubNet, which is the communications network we were deploying at the end of the last episode. What we have here is a delivery vehicle with 3 communication relays on it, and since we have 3 and a full day on Kerbin is just under 6 hours, we're going to put the delivery vehicle in a 4-hour orbit. This way, each relay should be around 1/3 of a rotation away from each other, and they should all be able to see each other. I did, however, make a bit of a mistake with the first probe here. So, geostationary orbit around Kerbin is at a height of around 2,863,000 kilometers. But I got my 6 and 8 modeled up, so I put it at a height of 2,683,000, and it was a little out of sync with the rest of them. Luckily, I caught my mistake early on when I realized that one of the orbits didn't match the other, so we fixed it pretty quick before we got any significant deviation. As a side note and a little behind the scenes of these episodes, I was actually trying to upload this episode today, and I got hit with copyright because the song I was using for this section is blocked in all the US territories, which I thought was a bit unfair, so I'm completely re-recording this bit with a hopefully not copyrighted song. So yeah, the period for geosynchronous orbit is 5 hours, 59 minutes, and 9 seconds, I believe. And if you get within about a second of that, then you won't experience any drift in your satellites for decades. So the way I've made sure that I'm as close as possible to this value is by turning the thrust limiter down on the engine right the way down to 0.5%, so we get really precise control over our orbital altitudes, and that way we can make sure our orbital period is dead on. And then it's just a matter of rinse and repeat for the other satellites, and that's the last one being deployed there. Yeah, you can see one of the orbits doesn't quite line up with the others. That is the first satellite in the wrong orbit, so I quickly go back and change that. It does mean they're slightly out of formation, but they can all still see each other, so it's fine. And there we are, the full network is complete. I didn't realize this, but the Orpheus and the Valkyrie actually have communication with each other, which means the range on our communication network is bigger than I thought it was. But at least now we have full coverage and there's no black spots. Now, originally I was going to just deorbit the delivery vehicle and watch it burn up in re-entry, but then I thought that's quite wasteful, so Instead, I decided to bring it into a low Kerbal orbit where we could go and collect it with the Galahad, and that way we're not littering one of the oceans of Kerbal with debris. So I actually sat down and worked it out. The cost of running the Galahad and the amount of money I make back by recovering the delivery vehicle gives me a profit of just 8,800 funds, which is chump change and not really worth anything. So to make this more worth my while, I took out a satellite contract, which was to put a satellite around the moon, and that paid about 207,000 funds. So we make money on this flight, and we're also doing a good cause by not littering space. Anyway, there we are, just finalising our orbit and getting the contract. So looking through my missions to make sure I've done all the parameters, and yeah, there we are, we've got the payment. So back to the Galahad. Now, I ran into a little bit of a problem during this docking. So when I was deploying the other satellite for the contract, I didn't want to put it too far forward in the cargo bay there, because the center of mass is already quite far ahead of the center of lift when the craft is fully fueled, so I didn't want to offset it even more, because then it would kind of fly a bit worse. So I put a docking port on the back. Now, I thought I had compensated enough on the front docking port to have enough room, and I guess I technically did, but it was a really snug fit. As you'll see in a moment, the docking port kept slightly getting in our way and causing us to bump out of the craft, and then we'd get the RCS port stuck on the outside of the cargo bay, and it just didn't really go very well. I had to go at it a few times. I actually wanted to keep the front docking port for the same reason. The engine section of the delivery vehicle is a lot heavier, so I wanted that closer to the center of mass so that we wouldn't make the craft too nose heavy on the way back down. But yeah, there we are on, I think it was my third attempt to get this thing in there. Eventually, I just managed to come at it with enough force to kind of jam it into the docking port before the other one could knock us back out again. I was slightly worried that the engine and the back docking port might have been clipping, which could cause some weird crackeny glitches on the way back down an aerodynamic flight, but I didn't really need to worry about that. And to see why that is, let me just play you the clip in real time. As soon as I heard that explosion, I knew exactly what it was. I'd forgotten to turn off the engine of the delivery vehicle, so when I throttled up to begin my deorbiting maneuver, I blew up the docking port that was causing so much fuss, so I think that's justice served. There we are with the second of the Eurydice probes landing on the surface of Eve. Those of you who watched the last episode might remember that I had a bit of a problem with the satellite dishes. I switched out the restock mod in the last episode, and that meant that the model for these satellite dishes had changed back to their original form, which means they extend past the base of the probe there, so I wouldn't be able to extend them and sit the probe on the surface nicely at the same time. Luckily, I had put a redundancy antenna on there, one of the static ones. That was mainly to keep communication during re-entry, but actually it serves well enough to communicate with the Orpheus from the surface, so it just means we have to wait for this Orpheus to be in the sky so we can communicate back home and send all of that juicy scientific data, but it works just fine. Now you may have seen the Parallax mod has added these strange glowing bubbles to the surface of Eve. My hypothesis is that because the surface is so prevalent in hydrocarbons that maybe these chemicals are being broken down into their constituent parts, so there's a lot of hydrogen escaping from the surface. This hydrogen is then trapped by the oily compounds on the surface to produce these bubbles that slowly float through the air. As for what causes them to glow, well, that is a bigger mystery. Perhaps there is some silicon-based bioluminescent life on the surface of Eve. We will certainly have to send future missions to explore that possibility. And there's no time like the present to get started on such a project. Continuing on the theme of Greek mythology, this is Project Zagreus. I won't lie, this is primarily named after the game Hades, because the point of Zagreus here is to try and return a sample from the surface of Eve. Yes, we will try again and again in roguelike fashion to escape the surface of hell. Of course, the problem with returning from the surface of Eve is Eve's immense gravity and very thick atmosphere, an atmosphere which contains zero oxygen, so our normal air-breathing engines don't work. One of the benefits of such a viscous atmosphere is that wings and propellers become a lot more effective. So I'm thinking I could design a sort of strata launcher where we use propellers to take a plane up to, quite high up in the atmosphere, and then hopefully we can get the rest of the way with rocket power. The technology isn't quite there yet. As you can see, this plane is very lightweight, so it's not quite capable of carrying a rocket-powered payload yet, but this was mainly to test the propeller technology because I've never really messed around with propellers before. I've tried a few times and, they're slow, so I've never really had the patience for it, but I'm starting to see the appeal now that I actually want to return from the surface of Eve. One benefit of this plane as it is its huge wingspan. This thing glides like a dream, and we know I like a plane that glides well. Ideally, I don't want to just ditch the Strata launcher once we send the payload back into space. I would like to keep the plane around so that we can travel to different biomes and collect a bit more science with it, if I have the patience, because this thing does fly very slowly. But yeah, here's just an example of how well it glides. I cut the engines and come in for a landing. Of course, on Eve, we will be landing on uneven terrain, so I wanted to test its ability to do just that. And yeah, of course, it does that very well on account of those huge wings, so the final design will certainly have to have big wings like that to glide well with. In any case, the transfer window to Eve is well over a year away, so we've got plenty of time to do more testing and design more planes for this. But all of that will have to wait, because that's all I've got for today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel to catch future episodes. If you want to catch up with older episodes, you can check out the playlist that this video is in. But I've been Moonfish1001, and I'll see you in the next video.